Welcome to Module 6, the causes of war and the military-industrial complex. This week we will be discussing the causes of war and how this has impacted the United States and military defense spending. To begin, I'd like to start by introducing two important thinkers about war and defense. The first is Aristotle. He says that we make war so that we may live in peace. And a second quote, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. The world in arms is not spending money alone, it is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children." A stark juxtaposition of war's meaning for modern society. So let's begin by discussing the various causes of war. Number one, there are many hypotheses for the cause of war and conflict in the international system. The first being power politics. As you'll remember, we discussed realism in a prior module. Realism argues that states' motivations in the international system are about pursuing power. This subsequently leads states to use whatever means necessary to achieve power, war being the ultimate tool at their disposal. As Karl von Clausewitz has argued, war is an extension of politics by other means. The second cause of war is war as a part of human nature. Although this explanation has fallen out of favor, writers such as Thomas Hobbes and Sigmund Freud argue that aggression is innate, stemming from humans' genetic programming and psychological makeup. Supporters of this theory note that Homo sapiens are the most deadly species and one of the few which routinely kill its own kind. However, critics note that the relative infrequency of war and the fact that some people are consistently non-aggressive indicates that genetics do not explain war behavior. Further, if genetics were involved, all humans should express tendency towards violent, aggressive behavior, but this doesn't appear to be the case. In other words, over the course of history, war has become a learned trait. This is the third cause of war. Essentially, war is a part of humankind's exposure to its cultural and environmental surroundings. Aggression is a propensity acquired early in life through socialization and learning. It is a conditioned response for which other substitutes can be learned. Although the belief that violence derives from an innate aggressiveness in human nature was popular, this view is now rejected by most observers in favor of this learned trait hypothesis. The fourth hypothesis states that the characteristics of nations are a cause of war. Here, conventional wisdom argues that some states are more warlike than others. Quincy Wright, in his landmark study of the causes of war across time, concludes that new nations are more likely to initiate wars than are mature states. The reason is due to periods of intense nationalistic feelings and nationalism, which drive states to acquire independence or settle territorial disputes. Further studies looked at the differences between democratic and authoritarian. Fifth, nationalism is a cause of war. One only need look around the world today to find substantial evidence for this hypothesis. Ethnic conflicts such as Bosnia, Kosovo, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Rwanda underscore the ability of fervent nationalism to cause war. Sixth, a state's level of economic development has been offered as an explanation for war. Advanced industrialized societies with relatively high standards of living tend to be satisfied and therefore less apt to initiate war that might risk their valued status. In fact, historically, most warlike states have been relatively poor states. Many hypotheses have been suggested to explain this, including one arguing that poor societies are internally unstable and that instability breeds war. Alternatively, war in the developing world may be seen as an effort to rectify perceived status discrepancies in wealth or prestige. Poor nations with an opportunity to improve their wealth might turn to war or attempt to obtain territory for prestige or raw material purposes, such as the blood diamonds that you see on the slide. Other explanations point towards the desire of developing countries to rid themselves of exploitative colonial masters or outside capitalist controls. Seventh, arms proliferation can be considered as a cause of war. This hypothesis argues that the spread of weapons to developing states increases the probability of war. If you look on the left, you can see a movie poster of The Lord of War, which deals with arms trafficking of weapons in the developing world. The international system itself is the eighth cause of war. There is the violence breeds violence hypothesis, which argues that the seeds of future wars are found in past wars. Examples include World War I, which left a situation in Europe allowing Hitler and Mussolini to come to power, saying they would restore their respective. The ninth hypothesis is the security dilemma as a cause of war. Robert Jervis observed that states' attempts to make themselves secure actually makes other states insecure. Examples would be the arms race during the Cold War by the United States and the Soviet Union, as the U.S. and Soviets' actions to increase their amount of nuclear weapons was meant to enhance their own security, but it was often seen as threatening by the other side. And finally, there are psychological explanations for war. Misperceptions of intentions and miscommunication between leaders resulted in the outbreak of World War I. However, with war such a prevalent part of human nature in the international system, states maintain standing militaries to defend their national interests. It is thus important to study defense policies of various states. At the end of the Cold War, the dominant trend among most states, aside from the U.S., has been to cut defense spending and downsize their forces to better reflect the post-Cold War threat environment. The U.S., however, has drastically increased its defense spending relative to all potential state opponents. Because nations differ in their strategic and geostrategic circumstances, they also differ in their defense requirements. Accordingly, some nations are just more vulnerable to aggression than others, and thus may have to spend more to achieve comparable levels of security. Some nations stand alone, others are part of powerful alliances. Some states can amplify their military capabilities with non-military forms of power, such as financial strength or diplomatic means. In essence, power is relational. Some states have to spend more than others to have comparable security, and not all states have similar needs. Another way to look at defense spending is that there are military opportunity costs and economic opportunity costs. Military opportunity costs mean that if you spend your defense dollars on particular types of weapons, you don't have that money to spend on other types of weapons, nor for expanding special forces units or improving military pay. Economic opportunity costs, on the other hand, simply mean that money wasted on unnecessary defense spending is money not spent on children, infrastructure, or preventing massive national debts. Demographics alone suggest that it is inevitable at some point in the not-too-distant future, just like other countries, we will be forced to consider the economic viability of our present levels of defense spending. Since the beginning of the Cold War, the U.S. has spent more than $11 trillion in today's currency, creating and maintaining a military establishment that is unquestionably the world's strongest and most capable. Indeed, the U.S. presently spends far more than any nation on earth to maintain our large force structure that was developed during the Cold War. Our annual defense budget is 5 times larger than any of the single countries below us. Today, in terms of ongoing defense policy, around the world, states are reducing the size of their armed forces and relying more and more upon smaller force structures and force projection with elite units, high technology, and quick reaction forces. This trend has been the result of both declining global military threats and the heavy financial constraints facing many countries today.